Today I want to share something really special with you, and it's about the core issue of our quest. Is the sound live enough? Does it sound like a live performance? And this is the big buzz in the audiophile community, is that which system does sound live and which sounds like reproduced music. And I would like to broaden our horizon by introducing two very neat A/B tests. Or I would say listening test is not just an A/B test, it's a more complicated. Usually when we do A/B test, we have a stereo system and then you A/B two components, like you change your interconnect cables to see if it makes a difference, or you change your amplifier or speakers or something. And then you can tell, oh, which one do you like better, or which one you think is worse, or performs poorer by some standards. And the smallest scale you can do this is just by yourself. You are at home and you swap your amp for another amp. And then when you step up, then you invite your friends over and everyone can form an opinion and you can discuss what did each of you hear. Maybe dynamics improved, but you get extra grain, and for some people the improvement in dynamics is more preferable, and others do not like, they cannot stand the increasing gain and they prefer the other one even though that was less dynamic. So as you see, these discussions can get really complex, but usually they are extremely narrow in focus. And the problem with that is that if you just swap a component for another component, you are not testing the component, you are testing the system, how your system reacts to that component. And if you see that reaction in your system, if you put it in a different system, you might see a very different kind of reaction. And this is something very complex, and we will talk about it later. And for now I will just show you something which one of the channel's readers brought to my attention. And this is a fantastic A/B test that was done the end of last year, and they did something really fantastic. They had a live band playing, they recorded the band and they played it back on their system, and they had a panel of amplifiers that they kept on swapping, really nice amps, so all of them were tube amplifiers, some were single-ended and others push-pull. So they had a bunch of single-ended, bunch of push-pull in the same system, and they listened to the music that they just heard the band play live. And this is really fantastic. I think this is a much more comprehensive test than what we usually do. Listen to some music that's on a recording and you have no idea how it sounded in real life. And so from this type of test you can get much more information, and these were the folks who posted it. If you can just find it in YouTube if you type this in, but if you go to my channel, and I have recommended music playlist, if you go to my recommendations, this is linked there as well, so you can find this link. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's a 3 hours long listening comparison, but if you want to hear like the specific amps, they have a nice list down below on their channel, and you can go to those amps that you want. But I recommend to just listen to those parts when they talk about the setup, the live band, how it was playing, and it's like super duper neat. And I think this is the best listening test I've lately seen on YouTube, and I really highly recommend everyone to check it out, unless you are of the new generation and your brain just shuts down after 2 minutes. So in that case, don't worry about it, but then probably this audiophile hobby is not for you either, because in 2 minutes you are going to solve 0. So now I'm going to show you something even more exotic. So with that system, there was a panel of about, I think there was like 5 or 6 guys who were seasoned audiophiles, and they listened to the systems, they listened to the live music, and then they talk about their opinions, what they think, how the sound was. And that was 6 people basically. And here I'm going to show you a test that will just blow your mind. And this was not just a test, this was a scientific study that was planned, designed, and executed according to plan, and then published in a scientific journal. And it was done in 1956. And what they did is that they recorded a symphony orchestra and they played it back in the same opera hall where it was recorded. So this is just totally mind-blowing, because it takes care of the #1 most important issue on reproductions, and that's the acoustics. So to really have an idea whether it sounds live or not, you really should listen to it at the same place where you recorded it, and then you can tell much more whether it can reproduce the acoustics or not. And interestingly, this study was done by an Ampex system, and eventually I have read this study a long while ago, and this was one of the reasons why my curiosity was aroused in the Ampex amplifiers. And those of you who do not know what Ampex amps are, they used to be the state of the art of the 50s and 60s. So they were the movie theater amplifiers, and they represented the peak of high-end audio in the 50s and 60s. And actually, if you want to compare them to Marantz and any other brands that were famous of the era, these guys were a category on their own. And if you just think about the cost, like the Heath kit were like a cheaper kit version of the nice Marantzes, and the Ampexes were way above the Marantz category. And if you look at the Marantz amplifier, then that was the price of maybe like a third of a car. The Heathkit W6 was the price of a motorbike, and the Ampexes, they did not have a price tag because they were so expensive that nobody could afford them, and they were leased to the movie theaters. So it was really exclusive at that time, and eventually today it's kind of forgotten because the cinemas, they have transferred over to the Dolby THX system, and they throw out all of their older tube equipment, which was Ampex gear. In the good quality theaters, the lower grade theaters had copies or other gear, or in Europe they had Blaupunkt systems, which were also very nice. I mean, the nicer theaters. The other ones had much lower grade systems. And in the West, with the change of the theaters, we have totally forgotten about Ampex and what kind of sound potential do they have. But and here, especially in the US, the cream of the high end is supposed to be those companies which produce like the $1 million systems. So when you think about Dan D'Agostino amplifiers, Wilson audio speakers, MBL, that type of thing, this is considered here as the cream of the cream. But if you go to Asia, like Southeast Asia and Japan, these things are considered okay there, but there the cream of the cream is the Ampex systems and Audionaut and Kondo. So in Asia, that is the cream of the cream, and for us, it's the Wilson D'Agostino type of sound. And the problem or the issue is that here in the US, you do not hear the Ampex sound, you do not hear properly set up audio note, you almost never hear condo. So people have no idea what the Asian camp is so big about. But in Asia, they have both the Wilson sound, the D'Agostino sound, and the condo and Ampex sound. So they have a basis of comparison that we do not have here. And so here I'm just introducing what was the aim of this study. So the aim was that can the audience tell whether it's live performance or recording? And they also had trained listeners, and they were curious how the trained listeners reacted to the sound. What was their opinion on the difference between live and recorded sound? And they also, so they asked these questions because they wanted to know if the playback equipment is sufficient to reproduce live music at a high enough quality. And of course, what they wanted to know is what is the key difference that people hear between live and recorded music. And you have to know that this was done at a time that was before the days of Harry Pearson, so we did not have these modern terms to describe sound that we have today, which are based on photography. So they are not based on sound. So when you think about resolution and contrast and stuff like that, dynamics, micro level detail, so all of these come from photography. So these are not musicians' terms. So what you will hear, how people describe the results, were using their terms. And in the 50s, people were not Neolithical, so our grandparents' generation, they were not, like amoebas, because I think people now, we have that huge misconception that as time progresses, we become smarter in every aspect and technology gets better in every aspect. Unfortunately, I have to tell you guys, because I grew up with my grandpa, and my grandpa was one of the top musicians of Hungary, and I got some lessons from him, and I heard him play and listen to music. And just because it was your grandpa's generation, they had way better sense of musicality and hearing than what is the average and the high standard today. So just because you think that now we have a better stereo or more expensive stuff, or music is coming to you through YouTube and your cell phone, that doesn't make you more qualified. That doesn't make me more qualified than my grandpa, who grew up playing music instruments, listening to singing. They were singing themselves. They went to opera. They went to classical concerts every week. So they were exposed to it, like they lived in it. And for us, it's just a curiosity. So this test was done with what was the state of the art of that day, was a full Ampex recording and playback system. And why that piqued my curiosity is that because I also reproduced for myself something like that, because I was interested in whether that 50s reproduction system, how would it sound today. And that's not something like an anachronism, because you have to know that as the audio progressed from its inception, those inventions that stay with us and which are the mainstream today and which are considered the high-end today, they were not the descendant of those systems which were the best sounding systems in back then. So back then the best sounding systems were high efficiency speakers, and today when you look at $1 million system, most of them are mid to low efficiency speakers. So they did not continue what was the best back then, but they continued with which was the most convenient and cheaper solution. So today we are kind of, so like today a high-end system, $1 million system, is more like not like a steak, but like a really fancy burger. And I was curious what would a steak look like if you make it and upgrade it with today's materials and today's technology. So I will introduce first this test to you, and then we can partially reproduce the test, so that I will put you some music on my system, and I will record it, and then of course you will not hear it, you will just hear a YouTube version of it, which is really degraded compared to the original, but I will make some comments on how that compares to a real life symphonic event. So here's the test. They did this at the San Francisco War Memorial Opera House, and you see there's the orchestra on the stage, and there are these huge things like 1, 2, 3. Those were the speakers, and you see, like, in front of that speaker you see 3 musicians sitting in front. So they were not exactly your typical bookshelf speakers, but they were really gigantic speakers, and they were, let's see what they were. So these were Ampex 5050 speakers, and these are 50% efficient speakers. So it means that 109 dB per watt at a meter. That's their efficiency, which is like crazy high. So when we talk about very high efficiency speakers, it starts at 100 dB, and this is like way more. So this is just like the highest end of efficiency that you can get at a reasonable size. You can go higher than that, but your speaker will be bigger than your house if you want to achieve higher efficiency than that. And I used the 6516 amps, the same amp that I will show, and I had Ampex mic and tape recorders. Of course I will use recordings that I have. I did not make recordings, or I do not have access to the original recordings that I made at that system. And just as a curiosity, so Bell System studies previously showed that 3 times 30 watts power amplifier with 50% efficient speakers can reproduce live orchestra at live volume in a theater. And this is what they were doing. So these Ampex amps, they are 30 watts output, they have 30 watts power output, and these speakers are 50% efficient. So let's see what this experiment was about. As I said, they took care of the room acoustics, so they recorded parts of the performance when 2 days before the actual event, when there was no audience sitting at the hall, and they recorded a lot of things that then they played back when it was filled with audience. So first, the event started with the announcement that they are going to play part of the performance from tape using a stereo system, and they will also do part of the performance by the musicians playing it live in real time. So the audience was prepared for the fact that they should be listening to hear if that's live or recorded. And there were 2,500 people in the audience who took part of this experiment, and there was a very large number of spotters, I think in the order of 100 or 200, who were interspersed in the audience and who watched the reaction and recorded it. And later on, during the break and the intermissions, they talked to the audience, and they noted down their reactions and comments. And then later on they analyzed how the audience reacted. So at the beginning they started with the Marriage of Figaro, and it was played from tape. But they did a trick. So the musicians, they just did as if they were performing, but they did not play the instruments. So it's really easy to fool the audience for like a trumpet player or a woodwind player, because they moved their fingers as if they were playing, but they were not blowing the instrument, so no sound came of it. For the violins, they had to be more inventive, so there they put cellulose tape on the bows, so that they were moving the bows, but no sound came. Because if they would have held the bow away from the instrument, the audience would have spotted it right away, and they could have told that, okay, now it's clear it's coming from the stereo, because they are just faking it. So they prepped the orchestra to give a really credible rendering that they are the ones actually playing. And the very interesting thing that happened is that they started the Marriage of Figaro from tape, and at the very end of the overture, they stopped, they put down their music instruments, and then the music continued, because the whole thing was from stereo. And the reaction of the audience was that almost everyone thought that until the point that they did the pantomime, it was real music, real playing, and when they put down the instruments, that's when the recorded part began. And you would think that, wow, oh, it's easy to fool them, they were, my grandpa's dumb people. No, they were not dumb people. They were people who frequent that opera house. They are there every week. They hear performers performing every week. They heard that orchestra perform probably on a weekly or monthly basis. So they were really used to how it sounds, and even they were fooled. And what the spotters noticed, that those people who were not fooled, they were in the first rows, and they saw the celluloid tape on the bows, and that's how they noticed that that's a recording. But other than that, they would have thought that when it was played from the stereo, it was live. They are hearing the musicians, even in the first row. So I think that that's a pretty crazy factoid there. And also what they noticed is that, and what the spotters shared, is that at those parts, when they were playing the really quiet parts in the first few rows, you could hear the tape hiss. And as the audience caught on by gauging from the tape hiss, the first couple rows, they could tell, okay, now we are hearing the recorded music because we hear the tape hiss. But they could not tell it from the sound quality. Just the tape hiss was a giveaway. So if they would have played just tape hiss under the live band playing, they would have thought it's the same thing as the thing coming from a tape. So they did an additional experiment. I'm not going to go into that because we would just sleep here. And they finished with Scheherazade's the Rimsky-Korsakov piece, which is like super dynamic, and they alternated real playing with recorded playing, and they did not stop between the sessions. So, and then they were really curious if the audience could spot whether which parts were played from the tape and which parts were played live. And the crazy thing is that about half of the audience couldn't tell any difference that when whether that was live playing or played from the recording. And part of the audience, about half of it, they could tell if it was recorded or live, but most of these people could not tell if it was the recorded they are hearing. They just heard the switch, that now it sounds different, but they couldn't tell whether they are now hearing the live version or the recorded version. They just noticed that the two have a marked difference between the two. And what was the difference? So I think this is the most intriguing part of this test, and that's why we really have to go sometimes back to step forward. And when they analyzed what the trained listeners were saying, they did measurements, and they just put together what they gleaned from it. Is they noticed that when the live recording, I mean the musicians were playing live, then there was a lower variation in SPL levels, in the volume levels in the audience. But with the reproduced music, there was over twice as much variation in the audience. So it's like depending on which seat you are sitting in, the variation, the SPL variation was that much. So from reproduction, you get a bigger variation. And then they noticed that the direct sound to the reverb sound ratio was different from the recording compared to the live. They also noticed that the string energy, so the violins, and the energy of the wind instrument, they did not have the same proportion in the recording. The violins still sounded like violins. Wind instruments sounded like wind instruments, but it sounded that the volume they were playing at, they were different compared to how the live music sounded. So it was not like how people perceive it. It was not like a recorded sound versus live sound, but two kinds of live sound played in a different way, and this different and what also they noticed is that the strings, so the violins, had much more direct sound from recording than in real life. So in real life you could hear much more of the concert hall's reverberations contributing to the sound of the violin, and from the recording it was more just the direct sound, and you heard much less the concert hall. And this is pretty much mind-blowing, because the reproduction was at the concert hall too. And just think about it, when they have with their layout, so the speakers were at the center of the orchestra, so the recorded sound came from the same space where the musicians were playing. Yet the ratio of the direct sound versus the reverb, it became altered. And I think this is a really key factoid, and then it really puts a huge question mark to our current obsession with the so-called mic feed, that to have a perfect reproduction we need to reproduce the recording perfectly, and that just doesn't work. And that's because the mic feed is already not true to the original recording. Yes, it can give you a live feel, so if people want to listen to music, most of them, with the exception of the most trained ears, cannot spot whether it's live or recorded. They will get the same enjoyment out of it. It's just you will have a little bit different focus. And what they noticed, that the distorted direct to reverb ratio, this is true today as well. So this hasn't changed. And this just points at the fact that the recording process misses out a lot of the recorded sound. So our microphones are really good at picking up the direct sound, but they do a really poor job on picking up the reverb of the concert hall. So I hope you got really curious, and it just started a few brain cells just to fire them up and to think about music and perspective. And we will continue and see at the equipment that they have used for this session, and I will compare that equipment to my version, how I rebuilt the equipment that they used at their test, and I will do a modest miniature test session at my place in my living room, to see whether for me it gives a credible impression of a live orchestra playing. So thank you for watching. Happy New Year for everyone. And please like and subscribe if you like it. Thank you.